Howdy, it's Jim Murado, and this is July 2023. Right now, we're in Nashville, Tennessee at the Loveless Cafe, about to get on the Natchez Trace Parkway. And just for the record, this is a great place, by the way. I'm going to put up another video about the Loveless Cafe. But if you're doing the Natchez Trace Parkway and you're starting in Nashville and going south, the Loveless Cafe is right by the entrance. You have no excuse for not stopping there if you're doing the trace. It's just something legendary that's a bonus to take in if you're doing the Natchez Trace Parkway. And before we get started, and by the way, we are getting on the Natchez Trace Parkway right now. Let me read to you a little bit from the National Park brochure. Just to give you an idea of what the Natchez Trace Parkway is if you're not familiar with it. And it says, along the Natchez Trace Parkway, stories of the Old Southwest await discovery on a streamside trail and a historic stand, or just around a bend in the road. The Natchez Trace Parkway leads you 444 miles through 3 states and 10,000 years of history. Established as a unit of the National Park System in 1938 and officially completed in 2005, the Parkway commemorates the most significant highway of the Old Southwest. The natural travel corridor that became the Natchez Trace dates back many centuries. It bisected the traditional homelands of the Natchez, Chickasaw, Choctaw nations. As the United States expanded westward in the late 1700s and early 1800s, growing numbers of travelers tramped the rough trail into a clearly marked path. Where the ground was relatively soft, walkers, riders, and wagons wore down the sunken section you see today. In 1801, President Thomas Jefferson designated the Trace a national post road for mail delivery between Nashville and Natchez. General Andrew Jackson, Meriwether Lewis, who died on the Trace in 1809, John James Audubon, Jefferson Davis, and U.S. Grant are some of the famous Americans to have traveled in the Natchez Trace. Most travelers, though, were anonymous working folks. In the early 1800s through the mid-1820s, cane tucks from the Ohio River Valley floated cash crops, livestock, and other materials down the Mississippi River on wooden flatboats. At Natchez or New Orleans, they sold their goods, sold their boats for lumber, and walked or rode horseback home via the old Trace. As the road was improved, stands, inns, provided lodging and food for travelers. Later, thousands of enslaved people were forcibly marched down the Trace. Today, the Natchez Trace Parkway creates a greenway from the southern Appalachian foothills of Tennessee to the bluffs of the lower Mississippi River. Along the way are sites like Emerald Mound, a National Historic Landmark and one of the largest American Indian mounds in the United States, and Mount Locust, one of the only 2 surviving stands from the old traveling days. The Trace also crosses 4 distinct ecosystems and 8 major watersheds. It is habitat for nearly 1,500 species of plants, 33 mammal species, 134 bird species, and 70 species of reptiles and amphibians. As a designated National Scenic Byway, All-American Road, and bicycling route, the Parkway is ideal for modern travelers to experience historic and scenic landscapes at a leisurely pace. And that brochure, kindly given to me by the National Park Service, also has a map and exit points for the Trace. And since we're going backwards, the Trace technically starts in Natchez, goes north to Nashville. So we're going backwards, if you want to look at it that way. So the mile markers start at 444 miles and go back to mile marker 1 in Natchez. And we obviously don't go that far south. We only spent really a few hours on the Trace. But we wanted to go and see some of the more interesting sights that are in Tennessee, the Tennessee part of the Natchez Trace. So we basically traveled mostly the Tennessee part, and we worked our way down towards Shiloh, and then we got off of the Trace because we wanted to go visit the Shiloh battlefield for a little bit, which I've visited before. I love it, but we wanted to see it again. And then later on, down by Tupelo, we would get back on the Trace briefly, but I won't really talk about that in this video. This is one of the first pullovers. It comes up kind of quick, and there's pretty much just the national park sign there. So, it's a nice photo op for your entry onto the Natchez Trace, or your exit if you did come up from Natchez. You'll notice as we're driving, there's not a lot of other cars. It's fairly there's not a lot of traffic. They don't allow commercial vehicles unless you're driving to one of the one of the points on the Trace. And by the way, I thought about it. I videotaped almost all of our driving for the first couple hours anyway, and I thought for a moment about trying to do a sped up video, but I thought, no, that doesn't give you a sense of just how relaxing and how nice this is. And we are coming to one of our first stops that we hit, and this is Birdsong Hollow. And this double arch bridge over Tennessee Highway 96 won the 1995 Presidential Award for Design Excellence. And there is a little pull-off area where you can go over and look at the bridge, and we'll be driving over the bridge momentarily. And there's also, I'm not sure if it's an official trail, but there's a little trail where you can walk down to the bridge, but be careful, there's poison ivy. So that was something I'm always careful about. I always look around, make sure there's no poison ivy. And ticks. Ticks are a big thing. I am a tick magnet. I attract ticks like crazy. So on this particular day, we were careful about where we walked out to, just because of that. Yeah, and here we are. We're about to go over this bridge, and you may notice they've gated it up. There was a little sign back there too about suicide. Obviously, they're trying to make sure nobody jumps from this bridge. It is very high, and there would be little signs, with hotline numbers and brochures also at the Meriwether Lewis stop that we'll get to here momentarily. Of course, Meriwether Lewis, it's debatable. He may have shot himself. He may have been murdered. It's still up for debate. But they did have that kind of information there too. Anyway, nice drive over that bridge. Even with those gates up, it was something pretty cool. And then we're making our next stop, and we made several stops. I've included a few of them here just to give you an idea of what you can see. But here was a War of 1812 memorial at the Old Trace. During this war, soldiers marched to and from battle along the old Natchez Trace, and they've got that monument there, so we stopped to see it. And that was a mile marker, just for the record, 426.3, just to give you an idea. And we'll stop at a couple more stops. I'd say two that really stand out to me, of course, was, you see people on bikes too. We'll stop at the Meriwether Lewis site, and there's also a tobacco farm that we'll stop at, and there's a little 2-mile drive you can take. I think they described it as a loop, but it's a dirt road, and if you decide to make that drive, be very careful. I'll warn you now. But yeah, we're continuing on, driving down the Trace, and there's another biker, little guy on a bike. Hello. Yeah, and we're next stopping at, oh yeah, the Gordon House. Mile marker 407.7, site of early 1800s trading post and ferry. Gordon family home dates from 1818. And you can walk out to the Gordon home, then there's some more trails. Also, bathroom facilities and a little picnic area here. Just a nice little stop, and we enjoyed it quite a bit. And one of the books that I picked up about the Natchez Trace mentions that coming back from the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson's troops stopped here to rest before making it on to Nashville. And there are stories that some of the sick soldiers passed away, and they were buried in unmarked graves behind the house. Also, during the Civil War, both Union and Confederate troops utilized the ferry. And we are leaving the ferry site, just turning out of the entrance and exit there, getting back on the Natchez Trace Parkway. Wanted to put a little more video in here of just the main road, so you can see how pleasant the drive is. Again, there's no no convenience stores. Really, very few buildings you'll notice as you're going through here. Most of them that you're going to see are historic, if not all of them, and just a very nice drive. And you can tell they do let farmers utilize the land, but it's just a nice scenic drive. Going back to where we were just at, I'm sure you noticed there were some interpretive markers that were very, very weathered. Definitely need some work on those. But otherwise, you can tell that this whole area is just really well maintained, and it just looks so nice. Also, I mentioned a moment ago a book that I picked up about the Natchez Trace Parkway. Let me give a quick endorsement to The Haunted Natchez Trace by Bud Steed. Picked this up after we visited, and I read it pretty quickly. A really well done book. I know a lot of these ghost books can be hit or miss, but Bud does a great job of talking about the Civil War stuff that goes on. That stuff, that stuff I care about when I'm traveling. He gives a lot of history. He's done his research, and then he adds a little ghost story at the end of each section. And he's obviously covered the whole Natchez Trace himself. He's got some of his own photos in the book, and I think he's just written a nice book that you might want to take with you. I know the next time, or whenever I'm finally able to do the entire Natchez Trace Parkway, maybe over a week or something, I'll definitely take this book with me. He also talks about some of the towns that are 5 or 10 miles off of the trace, some of the historic towns you're going to want to see. Of course, he covers Franklin, Tennessee, one of my favorite towns. But let me just go ahead. I hope it's okay to read the description from the back. Journey through the trace, if you dare. Stretching from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee, the Natchez Trace is one of the oldest, most historically significant routes in American history. Beginning as hunting ground for natives, the trace became the favored path back home for early settlers who floated down the Mississippi River to sell goods in Natchez. Yet the trace was riddled with bandits, marauders, and other perils, and today troubled and tortured voices from the past still echo along the road. Travel to Grinder's Stand, where famed explorer Meriwether Lewis met his untimely demise, and on to King's Tavern, built in the late 1700s and haunted by the ghost of the innkeeper's mistress. Author and ghost expert Bud Steed recounts these tales and more, all lurking in the shadows of the haunted Natchez Trace. And one thing he gets onto the topic of land pirates and those bandits, and I just it's scary stuff. When you think about the late 1700s, early 1800s, you're coming back from Mississippi with the money from selling your wares down south. You don't have the security of a hotel. You don't have, a cell phone. It's a slow moving road, and you're going to be walking or riding a horse, and you're going to be going a whole lot slower than we go today. And it's just kind of a scary thought. It's exciting, but it's also scary. And I just yeah, I think a lot about that. I think a lot about how too, if you were, say, let's say you were murdered on the Natchez Trace coming back from selling things in Mississippi. Obviously, your family wouldn't get that money. They would desperately need it, and they would never know what happened to you. There'd probably, there wouldn't be a call from the police saying, "Hey, we found, Bob's body." It, you would just be lost forever. And just a really scary thought, how things were done way back then. But we don't have to worry about that now. We're on a beautiful paved road, taking a nice leisurely drive. But I definitely wanted to mention Bud Steed's book. I thought it was an enjoyable read and had a lot of history to it. And he tells the ghost stories, but he also did his research too. And I think that's the way a ghost book should be. And we're about to hit another stop on the way. We're gonna exit briefly and look at an old section of the Natchez Trace around mile marker 403. Yeah, they actually call it the Old Trace, but it's definitely a worn area where people walked for decades, and you can see just how worn out it is here in a moment. There's a little sign about it, and yeah, right there it is. That's what it would have been like traveling the Natchez Trace, late 1700s, 1800s. And it's very worn out, of course. We're back on the road, and just a couple of miles from where we were just at, there's the Tobacco Farm / Old Trace Drive. And you're going to see an old tobacco barn and a one-way 2-mile partly paved drive along Old Trace begins here. It says no RVs on the drive. Just for what it's worth, we did that whole drive. I almost included it in this video, but it is boring as heck. It's like an old gravel road, and they should warn you a little more. I was scared my car wasn't going to make it. There's an old tobacco barn. I grew up raising tobacco. My dad farmed tobacco most of his life, as did his father. My granddad had a big tobacco barn, similar to this one, but it was bigger. And it was the entire family, cousins, uncles, my mom, everybody participated, and we all worked in tobacco for that tobacco money. Now, I remember my older cousins, getting up in the rafters of those barns. They'd pass the tobacco sticks full of tobacco up to dry the leaves. And it was scary. They had no harnesses or anything like that. If they fell, they would have been in some serious trouble. They never did, though. But it was a big family affair, and I'm glad we don't do it anymore. It was hard work. Even when I was a little tiny boy, they'd have me, hoeing or taking sticks out or whatever they could have me do. They had me doing it, and it was just hard work for everybody. And then this is the 2-mile path. Again, I almost included the entire drive in this video. But it's scary. Like, they need to have warning. Like, if your car's not in really good shape, don't drive on this road. It's there were bumps, there were holes. We drove it nice and slow. 2 miles driving on this road probably took about 10 minutes, and it's a nice wooded scenic drive. It does remind me. It kind of goes along with that tobacco barn. It reminds me of some of the little roads that we would have along our tobacco fields, and you would drive pickup trucks in those areas, but they weren't really made for vehicles, but you still did it. But this is a very, very primitive road, as you can tell. And I would recommend, if you're doing the Natchez Trace Parkway, do not drive on this. It's just maybe if you have a pickup truck or a vehicle that's got a lot of pull, you'd be fine, but otherwise, think twice, as you can tell. And like I said, I only put a little bit of our drive on this video, and I'm not sure how many people actually do this. It looks pretty overgrown anyway, So I don't think a lot of people are driving this trail. And we got to the end. I was never so happy to see a stop sign and to see an actual paved road in my life. So we came out here and we drove on to our next stop that we were excited about seeing, which was, let me find it, the Meriwether Lewis site. Of course, Meriwether Lewis. It's the monument. It's at milepost 385, and that is where Meriwether Lewis is buried, and also the site where he died. He died under mysterious circumstances. It's still debated whether he killed himself or was murdered, and they do have information about that at the visitor center. There's a National Park Visitor Center here, and it's housed in a replica of the old Grinders stand, the tavern where Meriwether Lewis died. And that big marker there, that big monument, that is where he's buried. And then just a 2-minute walk from here, there's the National Park Visitor Center and the Grinder Stand replica building. And right beside that is, you can see some of the rocks from the old Grinder Stand. Anyway, that's the Natchez Trace Parkway. Have you done it? Let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed riding along with me.